the Olympic Games, benchmarks of modern society. Yet their roots go back millennia, all the way to the ancient Greeks. The Romans have given us modern legislature
Not so fast.
and a sophisticated infrastructure. While the Vikings established elaborate trading networks and discovered America well before Columbus. They've all helped forge a new world. The Greeks, the Romans, and the Vikings are the founding fathers of modern Europe. The Vikings live widely scattered across the north of Europe. The Romans call the cold, rugged home of the Norsemen Scandinavia. It's a mysterious, alien land. Remote and scarcely populated. A land where fire and ice meet. Untamable natural forces rule the land. And it's surrounded by the cold northern oceans. At first, the Vikings lived peacefully along Scandinavia's coastline, in particular around Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. But before long, the Norsemen set out on their ships to terrorize Europe. Their story begins around 793 AD. Viking dragon boats suddenly appear on the coastline of the British Isles. Their target is the small island monastery of Lindisfarne, an important pilgrim's destination in the north of England. The monastery is home only to monks. The devout men are rich and peaceful. They defend their treasures only with words, not weapons. But the Vikings see their Christian god as weak. A god who doesn't believe in fighting, dies on the cross, and can't protect his people. A bizarre concept for the Norsemen. So the monk's valuable property is seen as an easy target for a Viking raid. The monastery is close to the sea. Once their ships have reached the shore, they want to attack quickly and out of the blue. It's typical Viking strategy. They don't go in for long-term planning. The warriors on the boats are fearless and battle-hardened. The momentous raid on the monastery is not their first. Unguarded treasures like these are a huge temptation for the marauders. By the time the monks notice the strangers, it's already too late. The raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne marks the Vikings' entrance into world history.
No sooner had the monks seen the Viking ships on the horizon than the warriors would have been here, standing at the monastery. For the monks, this would have been a traumatic experience. Many of them saw it as a sign of worse to come, and they were right. The raids continued until eventually the monks were forced to abandon the monastery.
For many people in those days, these tall, strong men who know neither fear nor mercy epitomize sheer terror. The Vikings are infamous for both their brutality and their bravery. The Berserks especially push the boundaries of violence. They are the toughest warriors of them all, a kind of elite troop. The churchmen don't stand a chance against these attackers. All that's left to them is their prayer. Most of them are killed. Any survivors are sold into slavery. Back at home, the rich spoils will earn the plundering warriors power and honor. Whatever they can fit on their ships is taken and divided amongst them at a later stage. All they leave behind is death and destruction. The attack on the monastery is only the beginning of a reign of terror. The much-feared dragon boats now appear often along the British coastline. During the early Middle Ages, half of Europe lives in fear of Viking attacks. They're the most successful fighters of their time, even though their equipment leaves much to be desired. They don't usually own chainmail shirts, and their weapons are basic. Hardly any of them wear helmets, especially none with horns. They're a myth. The horned helmets are an invention made famous through Richard Wagner's operas. There is much speculation about the legendary berserks. Some experts think they may have consumed intoxicating mushrooms before battle, but those cause nausea. It's possible other plants were used that could also have worked as intoxicants, including a fungus found in grain crops that apparently causes hallucinations. And biting their shields may have triggered a sort of self-hypnosis. But most believe that this elite troop hyped themselves up into an adrenaline-fueled frenzy by shouting. It releases hormones that make warriors less susceptible to pain.
Nowadays, we believe that it was their fighting spirit and not their weapons that made the Vikings such effective warriors. This was a time when most people were violent, but perhaps the Vikings, more than anyone else, really understood how violence worked. They even gave their swords names, celebrating it. Battle Blaze, Bloodthirster, Life Hater. These swords weren't better than others, but they were an integral part of their owners' lives, important possessions. We can compare this to those people today who give names to their boats or cars.
But their most important weapons are their ships. This is where the Scandinavians are in their element. They don't just build the fastest boats of their time, but also the most stable. Their forays lead from the coasts of Scandinavia to the beaches of the Baltics, the monasteries of England and the Rhineland, the harbors of France and Spain, right down to Italy. The Vikings target centers of commerce right across Europe. Their so-called dragon boats offer enough space for a few dozen men and are ideal for raids. Fara e Viking, to journey like a Viking. Anyone taking part in them is called Vikinger or buccaneer. But these brutal thieves also have a much more peaceful side to them. Most of the time, they all live quiet lives at home as fishermen, farmers, or craftsmen. Their products are easily sold on the markets, especially tanned animal skins and furs. Some even make rune stones, but the majority live off the land, the sea, and the countless lakes. Their blacksmiths are famous. This is where much of their loot is smelted down, where valuable coins can be turned into jewelry. A typical Viking house is small and windowless. Large, long houses are reserved for clan chiefs and their families. At the beginning of the Viking era, the Norsemen know neither state nor kingdom. They're organized in large family clans with a leader, the Jarl. Below the Jarls are the free men, farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and merchants. Their wives are in charge of the house. When the men are away on raids or business during the summer, they manage the estate on their own. The underclass consists of servants and laborers. All important decisions are made at the People's Assembly, the Ting. The free men of a district meet at a specified time out in the open. That's where important decisions are debated and judgments are made in case of disputes.
Listen up! We have come together to make a decision that is good for us all. We have to reach a consensus. If anyone wants to speak, speak now!
In Iceland, the Althing takes place at the foot of a volcanic crevice, a magical place. It's one of the rare times when the Vikings come together from their scattered farms. There are also a few towns, trading posts like Birka, Kaupang, and Haithabu in today's Schleswig-Holstein. That's where international business connections begin to develop in the 10th century. At the time, Haithabu has about 1,000 inhabitants, and its harbor is famous for the visiting ships from all corners of the world. Merchants from all over Europe come to Haithabu to trade their goods for the Vikings' jewelry and looted treasures. One Eastern merchant describes Haithabu as the big town at the far end of the ocean. The Scandinavians' raucous parties are infamous. The Norsemen like to drink. Getting drunk is even seen as a sign of masculinity. And no party is complete without a poet who recites songs in praise of the host. He's known as the Scouther.
What's going on? Where's your performance? Our guest is bored already.
A song for our host and his well-traveled guest. He has fought great battles and returned with rich booty and lets us all have part in it. Invites us to his banquet.
Skull!
He is well read and has traveled the world, but he can drink like no other and has the most beautiful woman at his side.
Skull! You are as tall as our date palms. Your women are blonde and glowing as the sun. And you are hospitable in a way I have never encountered on my many travels.
The Scouthers travel between estates to recite heroes' tales and verses, mainly in praise of whichever lord is currently playing host. For a long time, their stories are only passed on orally. Not until the 12th century are they also written down. The famous Norse sagas and Edda songs emerge. They recount the deeds of fearless men, of drinking sessions and raids, of odysseys and wars. But they're also about the Vikings' gods, and there are many of those. The Vikings' mythology is rich and colorful. Their world is full of mystery. Their surroundings are inexhaustible sources of myths and magic. A spirit could live in every crevice, in every geyser. A giant could be at home in a volcano, or a dwarf could keep his smithy there. Giants are even said to have been involved in the creation of the earth. In the beginning, there is just fire and ice. But when they touch, the first ancestor, Ymir, emerges. But the gods kill Ymir and form the earth from his body. His blood fills the oceans, his bones make up the mountains, and his hair the forests. His skull turns into the sky, and his brain into clouds. Then the first human pair emerges from two tree trunks. Odin is the chief god and lives in Valhalla. A rainbow bridge connects his realm with the human world. Odin's son, Thor, is the strongest of all the gods. He fashions rain and thunder with his hammer and protects the people. Whatever happens on Earth, Thor is always the one asked to help. But when somebody dies, people also consult the advice of magicians. Husbands and fathers often don't come back alive from their raids. Their families ask wise women for advice about what happens to the dead. Nobody really knows what happens after death, but what is certain, not everyone has an afterlife. The souls of the dead that don't make it to the afterlife are said to haunt the earth as returnees. The Vikings are afraid of that.
They brought him back. He's dead.
How did he die? In battle?
I didn't see a single wound on him. I don't know. But I want to know what will happen to him now. Where will he go?
We can't see into the other world. You should be glad about that. But you can do something to ensure your father's ghost doesn't come back to haunt you.
What is it?
When you bury him, make sure his head is laid to rest between his legs.
Only brave warriors find a place in the other world. They go to Valhalla. That's where Odin and his wife live and enjoy the fallen Vikings' endless duels. Here, the chosen few live on until the end of the world. During the day, they compete against each other. And in the evening, they celebrate at Odin's table with mead and meat. Valhalla is paradise. Anyone unlucky enough not to die in battle goes to Hell, a dark realm of lifeless souls. So anyone able to afford it buries their dead in style. One of the biggest graves is in South Sweden. Huge rocks erected in the shape of a ship surround the burial site. The ship is to take the dead to the afterlife. In 1903, the most famous ship burial site is discovered in Norway. A farmer has found a few wooden scraps on his land. 1 year later, archaeologists uncover the Oseberg ship. It is 22 meters long and made of oak. The burial chamber is behind the mast. That's where the researchers find the skeletons of 2 Viking women. They must have been rich. The Oseberg ship is more like a yacht than a warship, but it clearly demonstrates the Vikings' shipbuilding skills. A decorated cart and wooden sledge are part of the grave goods. Everything a Viking needs to live a comfortable life after death. The skeletons suggest that a very old woman was buried in the ship together with a young girl, probably a queen and her servant. Anyone with such an imposing grave must have had a lot of influence. Today, the Oseberg ship remains one of the most important finds from Viking times. We know surprisingly little about Viking beliefs because they didn't write anything down. The Edda and other texts were written down in the High Middle Ages, so they're not from Viking times. I don't think these guys were that religious, but instead very tolerant, just like Scandinavians today. 10th century, this tolerance produces a fusion of religious beliefs.
This will help you.
The Vikings are open to new ideas, and so Christian beliefs gradually infiltrate their magical northern world. Many of them soon own a cross alongside their heathen amulets. They don't see a problem in asking for Thor's as well as Jesus's protection. Gradually, missionaries convert more and more Vikings to Christianity. From the 9th century, German bishops sent missionaries to Scandinavia without much success. There are several reasons why this endeavor, which started from Germany and later England, had any success at all. It has little to do with religion. On the one hand, all of Western Europe was already converted, and it was much easier for Scandinavian merchants to deal with Christian merchants if they too were Christians. And more importantly, Christianity offered a better deal for life after death. The Vikings only had Valhalla for warriors who died in battle, but for everyone else, Christianity offered life after death in paradise, as long as you lived a good earthly life. And finally, these small kings, chiefs and lords also wanted to feel as divine leaders appointed by God, like the great kings of England and France. This was a motivation for spreading Christianity from the top down. The new religion gains ground, initially in Denmark, then in Norway, Iceland and Sweden. The conversion is generally peaceful. Women are particularly receptive to the new belief. After all, it promises them a good life after death, too. Soon, the missionaries from Germany and England are part of the tapestry. And over the course of centuries, heathen Scandinavia becomes Christian. Norway's famous Stave Churches from the 12th and 13th centuries are some of the first in Scandinavia. In Sweden, a golden crucifix is proof of the religious change at the time. But the original Viking mythology remains a treasure trove for opera and film, where clichés like the horned Viking helmets are kept alive. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, for example, was inspired by the Old Norse sagas. Asterix and Obelix meet the Vikings, although they have a different name, the Normans. And the wild Norsemen still fascinate children as animated characters on TV. There's a lot of fiction in what is said about the Norsemen, but one thing is certain. The Vikings are great explorers. While some go on raids, others set out to find new land. The inhabitable and fertile land at home is getting overcrowded. Numerous families set out to find their luck beyond the known world. It involves long and dangerous voyages. The Vikings rule the seas like no others. Their ships, known as knors, are stable and fit for the open sea. They safely sail them across the ocean and through stormy weather. In the 9th century, some Vikings leave the Norwegian coast and head northwest, past the Faroe Islands, and discover Iceland. The land there is less harsh than today and uninhabited. For many emigrants, these volcanic islands become a new home. A spectacular find has shown how the Vikings managed to travel over 1,000 kilometers to get to these isolated islands. In the 1960s, the wrecks of several Viking ships were found. Today, they're on display at the Danish Ship Museum of Roskilde. The remains are over 1,000 years old and give an insight into the Vikings' ingenious shipbuilding abilities. Two different types of ship were discovered: the stable transport ship, the knor, and the narrow and fast dragon ship used for raids. A few years ago, a museum team reconstructed one of the knors and launched it. The aim was to find out how the ships behaved at sea.
By sailing the ships themselves, we get to know how you actually use what these wrecks means. We don't know it by looking at the wrecks themselves. And simply by going in and rebuilding again and trying again, we actually get to know what it does.
Every summer, the sea stallion puts to sea. The crew lives on board for several weeks to carry out their experiments. They try out all sorts of maneuvers and are surprised how fast and steadily the ship glides across the water, even when there is only little wind.
I have the deepest respect for the Viking skipper, which have been sailing these ships for 1,000 years ago. Especially this thing that is a very simple construction of the sail, but at the same time, it's just perfect in balance.
Perfect balance and speed, the attributes of all Viking ships. They're still seen as the best of their time. During the building phase, the Vikings don't saw the planks, they split them along the grain, which makes them durable and elastic. The mast can be put up and taken down quickly, essential if there's a sudden bridge behind a bend in the river or the crew has to row. The sails are adjustable, so they can tack against the wind. And the ships have a very shallow draft. The time of the big voyages always begins in early summer, when the fjords and coastlines are free of ice and snow. One of their historic journeys starts in Iceland, led by the most infamous Viking on the island, Eric the Red. He's quarrelsome and hot-tempered. Several men lose their lives at his hand. Eric is ostracized on several occasions, but when he kills 2 men during a quarrel with his neighbor, he's finally banished from the island. This is how Eric the Red paves the way for later discoveries, even if his motivation is not the search for adventure. Eric leaves his homeland accompanied by a few men and several slaves. He wants to find a new land said to lie somewhere to the northwest. He later names it Greenland. By calling it Greenland, Eric wants to attract other settlers. His plan works, and many Vikings follow him. Leif is Eric's firstborn son. He's said to be a happy boy who dreams of exploring the world from an early age. A story he hears in his father's house stays with him. An Icelandic merchant is said to have drifted off course on his way to Greenland. Apparently, he reached a land much farther west. Explorer's blood clearly runs in the family. Leif is gripped by a thirst for adventure. Many years later, he sets off with his own ship to find this mysterious land. Their navigation follows old rules. The sun and stars, as well as experience, lead the way. Despite the threat of storms and huge waves, Leif's crew penetrates ever further into unknown terrain. They follow the west coast of Greenland for 3 days. Then, 2 days across the open sea, and once again along the coastline, until the adventurers reach Newfoundland. In the year 1001, Leif Erikson and his men set foot on new territory. None of the Greenlanders has any idea that they're standing on American soil or that they're making history. For the newcomers, what they see seems like paradise. They later describe the land as green and covered in flowering meadows. They call it Vinland.
We're not sure if it means wineland or grassland, but 2 sagas talk of this expedition to a land that must have been somewhere in North America or at its coastline. And the Vikings undertook several expeditions there around the year 1000. That much we know. And also, monastic texts from the High Middle Ages describe exactly where this land in the west really lies. The idea that the Vikings were the first Europeans in Newfoundland was long considered a legend. But in the mid-20th century, archaeologists find evidence. There are definitive signs of Norseman settlements. Today, the old farmhouses have been reconstructed. But the trail soon disappears. After a few years, the Vikings leave Vinland and never go back. Nobody knows exactly why they left. The Vinland saga tells of clashes with indigenous people. It takes 500 years before another European captain dares to cross the Atlantic. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovers the New World in the service of the Spanish king. But he and his entourage set foot on American soil over 1,000 kilometers to the south of Leif Erikson's expedition. The first European settlers follow Columbus. They stay, unlike the Vikings. Hundreds of thousands of slaves are kidnapped in Africa and brought here to toil in the new plantations. The New World is born. But the true discoverer of America is a Viking named Leif Erikson. Numerous finds are evidence that the Vikings didn't just go west, but also east. They include Arab coins found on the Swedish island of Gotland. Archaeologists have also found several thousand of these foreign coins in the harbors of the trading posts of Haithabu and Birka. Starting in Scandinavia, the Vikings build up an enormous trading network. They penetrate further and further into what is now known as Russia. Their aim is to reach the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople. Only the toughest of men dare to venture this far. The journey is long and arduous.
I can hardly wait to get out of this mosquito-ridden wasteland. If what you say is true, we'll be bathing in gold in Constantinople.
I hope so. Until now, we've seen very little. This here is what we have at home.
Just wait and see. You've no idea.
Then tell us again.
You've never seen anything like it. It's the richest city in the world. The people only wear velvet and silk, and jewelry of pure gold.
And the women?
The women? They have black hair and brown skin. There's something in their eyes. They bewitch men.
Yes, and the men are small as dwarves and can't even drink properly.
I'm not bothered about that, as long as they pray properly.
Tell me, can you also marry the women and take them with you?
That comes later. But eat something. Help yourselves. You need the strength. We still have a long way to go. Go on.
The journey from Russia to Constantinople is especially difficult. Ships and crew have to get through forests, conquer rapids, river banks, and deep swamps. It's a logistical nightmare. To traverse the enormous land, the Vikings at times even transport their knorrs across dry land. They develop a simple but effective method. When necessary, the Norsemen pull their boats along across wooden beams. Since Viking ships have no keel, they can't tip over. But they're heavy, and it often takes days before the men can return their boat to water. It's several thousand kilometers from Haithabu to Constantinople. The men move their ships with pure manpower. Only occasionally do locals help them out with draft animals. And everywhere they go, the Scandinavians spread fear. Not least when they develop an entirely new kind of business, slavery. In the forests of Russia, there are neither rich monasteries nor cities that might be worth plundering. And on top of that, slaves are worth much more than furs and animal skins. Not even children are safe from the Norsemen. The locals meet the traveling traders unsuspectingly. It makes them easy prey. The trade in human beings soon becomes their most lucrative income. The Vikings unscrupulously hunt people down to sell them as slaves on the markets of Constantinople. Until then, they're Viking property, who decide over the life and death of their prisoners. Over the course of centuries, thousands of people disappear forever somewhere on the slave markets. Constantinople is the target of all Scandinavian merchants. In the Middle Ages, it's the most important trading post between Europe, Asia, and the Near East. When they reach the Black Sea, after their tough journey through the Russian wilderness, they're almost there. There are incredible stories about the metropolis on the Bosporus, where East meets West, and people from different religions live together.
Constantinople
must have made an incredible impression on the Norsemen. They called it Miklagard, the big city, the metropolis of the Western world. The Vikings came from towns of mud walls with wooden houses, so a city of stone houses several stories high, paved streets, brick wells, water reservoirs, street lamps, and the mightiest city walls anywhere in Europe must have left an incredible impression.
Die mächtigsten Stadtmauern, die es überhaupt gab in Europa, das muss einen gigantischen Eindruck gemacht haben.
At the heart of the city is the huge bazaar. Alien smells of exotic spices, soaps, and perfumes fill the air. The stands are laden with goods from faraway lands, the streets filled with a colorful mixture of languages. The Vikings always make lucrative trades here.
How are you?
Their slaves and their furs are especially sought after. The Vikings exchange them for spices, silk, and jewelry, or they get paid in silver coins. It's important to haggle. But haggling has to be learned. Business in Constantinople can be tough.
We have 1 bearskin, 380 ermines, 50 sables, and these 2 slaves. What do we get for that?
What do you say?
20.
20, 20, 20. Oh, agreed.
10, 20 dirham. What does that mean? Numbers mean nothing. You should put coins on the scale so we can see how much silver we get. You, here, wait.
They pay in coins here, not in weight. Wait. Yusuf. Let's say 30.
20.
We've had a long journey. 25. Come on. For old time's sake. 25.
Shukran, Habibi.
Yusuf, you're a good businessman. Thank you.
Their constant business trips through Eastern Europe leave their mark. Over the course of centuries, Swedish Vikings repeatedly found and conquered towns in today's Russia. They're almost always important trading posts, such as Staraya Ladoga, Novgorod, and Kiev. The conquerors from the north are known as Rus. It's also the name of the first Russian state, founded in the 9th century by a community of people that also includes Vikings. But Russia is not the only state with Viking roots. In the 10th century, Vikings attacked the mouth of the Seine so frequently that the territory is eventually left to them. Known as Normans, they soon gained political influence. From the 11th century on, Norman mercenaries make their way to southern Italy, where they gain power. After conquering Sicily, they redesign Palermo as their capital. In Apulia, they erect numerous buildings in the Norman style. And even the German Hohenstaufen King Frederick II, who builds the Castel del Monte, has Viking blood. In 1066, William the Conqueror defeats England and is crowned the new king. He, too, is a descendant of Vikings. The Vikings left us a new, bigger Europe. They founded cities like Dublin, York, and Kiev. They also founded states, not just Normandy and Russia, but also the medieval Norman kingdom in the south of Italy. And they settled new lands like Iceland and Greenland. It means that they pushed Europe's horizons further out and left us a bigger Europe. As settlers, the Vikings colonize Iceland and Greenland. As discoverers, they set foot in America. Their descendants rule in Normandy, in England, South Italy, and Russia. They enter the world stage as plundering and murdering pirates. But the feared Vikings also have a peaceful side. Much of their time is spent at home looking after house and estate. In just a short span of time, the wild warriors from Scandinavia become global players. They build important trade networks to southern Europe and far into the east. And their tireless search for new land makes them the first to discover America. But in the high Middle Ages, there is no more talk of the Norsemen. It seems as if they've disappeared.
The Vikings make a very sudden, a very dramatic entrance into the historical record. In the end, they seem to fade away, but their expansion overseas forced them to adapt, to fit in with the other cultures they encountered, until eventually they stop being pagan Scandinavians and become medieval Europeans. Around the year 1000, they established the three great kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, later Sweden, which still exist today on a par with Britain and France. The Vikings don't disappear, they merge into world history.
The Viking inheritance are the metropolises and states they once founded and conquered. Their history is, at the same time, the history of the wild men of the north. Wherever they settled, the seafarers mix with the locals. They only exist as Vikings for about 200 years. Since the Middle Ages, they live on as Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes. But their incredible tales and sagas have stayed with us. Stories of warriors, merchants, and discoverers who spread fear through much of Europe.